Welcome to the Personal Development Mastery Podcast. I'm 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝗍𝘆 and my mission is to inspire you to rise up, grow, stand out and take action towards the next level of your life. I interview leaders, influencers, entrepreneurs, authors, exceptional people who can and will inspire you to improve your life. Tune in for 2 episodes each week and make sure you subscribe to the podcast to get the episodes as soon as they are released. In today's show, I am delighted to speak with Becky Morrison. Becky, you are a UC Berkeley certified executive coach passionate about people and processes. After a successful career in financial services, law, managing hundreds of people, you went looking for a new challenge, and in your transition there, you recognized that your true passion was people. And after that, you started your own coaching practice. You are a lifelong learner, and your passion is helping people live happy, priority-aligned lives. Becky, welcome to the show. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks, Agi. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you. Becky, shall we start with a little bit of background? So, from what I just read, like a very brief introduction of your story, that moment that you say that you discovered your passion being people, and I think that happened when you were in some kind of investment firm. So, can you take us back to how were you feeling at that time, and what happened for you to discover this passion that you say afterwards?
So if it's okay, I'm going to take you back a little bit further first.
Sure, absolutely.
So I've been on sort of a 2-decade journey to figure out what it is that really makes me tick and what it is that really drives my happiness. And I've sort of turned that into the work that I do. And it started back, I'm a lawyer. I went to law school. And so it started back 15 years ago when I was practicing law and sort of had this moment of, well, I've checked all the boxes, right? I went to a good college. I got decent grades. I wouldn't call them good, but decent grades. Got into law school, got good grades, got a job at a big law firm, was doing well, but wasn't happy. And so having this realization that, oh, here I am. I have a 2-year-old at home. My husband was working in a very intense career in counterterrorism, and I'm doing what I thought I should be doing, but yet not feeling great about any of it. And so that sort of launched me into this thought process of, wait a minute, happiness should be something that we have right now, not something that we are just waiting until to have. And so how do I architect a life that has more of what matters to me and less of the rest in it? And then that launched this long journey of sort of, I call them career left turns that didn't align with what were the logical next step or what people thought I should be doing, including ultimately leaving big law and going to work for a small investment firm because I wanted a new challenge and a new environment, and had a great time there. But a confluence of events happened, including a stronger economy in the US, which led to me and the CEO of that firm concluding that it didn't make sense for me to stay there. So I didn't technically get laid off, but effectively got laid off. And here we are again at a crossroads where I started to default to the natural rhythm of, well, what's the next logical step? Here I am, I've got a law degree, I've managed people for 15 plus years. Obviously, the next logical step would be to go to apply for legal management related jobs. And yet that did not sound at all fun. And that's not to take away. Look, I know some really good people who work in that space who are very happy doing it. So it's nothing wrong with the job. It was just a recognition that that wasn't what drove my happiness. And so really taking the time to take stock of, again, okay, now you have 15 more years of experience under your belt. What is it that drives your happiness? What is it that makes you happy? Where is that intersection between your strengths and feeling in flow and feeling like you're delivering value? And for me, I've for several years prior had been thinking about, if I could do anything, I would just work with people and help them solve their problems and enable their success. But you get to a point where you think, well, I can't make the right amount of money doing that. That'll be weird. I went to law school, like all of the noise that comes in from society. And so At that point, actually, I hired a coach who to help me kind of sort through what is it that drives me. And I came up with a list of things that mattered to my happiness, and then came up with a list of careers that I could get that in. And when I say, I mean, it was a wide ranging list. Interior decorator, fashion stylist, financial advisor, coach, social worker. I mean, all kinds of possibilities, but I went really broad on purpose, right? Without kind of limits and without thinking about practical constraints. I sort of went really big to say, well, what could I do? And then I'll figure out how, and landed on coaching. And that's how I landed at Berkeley. And that's how I landed doing what I do today, which has been an incredible fit for both my strengths, I think, and my happiness.
Thank you. And I got two bits of this story that you shared. And one was what you said, that you were doing well, but you were not happy. And I believe that many people can relate to that, because we have been, to some extent, been conditioned, really, that happiness is something that it's not. And the other thing that I liked very much was when you said you had that broad list of potential careers to do. The ones you described anyway had nothing to do at all with law or what you have. It was completely, 180.
Yeah.
So shall we talk about happiness then, because it is one of the most important topics that anyone can talk about. I believe it is something that drives most people, or people desire to achieve it, but they don't. And it would be great to discuss the reasons why, or maybe if they have the idea of happiness all wrong from the outset.
Yeah, I mean, so I've spent a lot of time, particularly over the past year, really thinking about how happiness works. And I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I've done a lot of learning about kind of how we're wired and what makes us happy. And then I've married that with my own life experience and with the experience of my clients to be actionable, because that's, to me, what matters, right? I think you said it before we started recording. It's all well and good to have the information, but if you don't have a way to implement it, then then what, And so I've got a book coming out in the spring. It's called The Happiness Recipe, A Powerful Guide to Living What Matters. And it is based on the following premise. It's based on the premise that the recipe for happiness is very simple. Do more of what matters to you and less of the rest. But simple doesn't mean easy, right? Yeah. And so I've identified, or I've sort of created a framework of 3 gaps that tend to get in the way of our ability to execute on that formula. So I'll talk you through those in very general terms, and then we can dive deeper wherever it makes sense to you. The first I call the authenticity gap. And that's where we aren't honest with either ourselves or with the people around us about what really matters to our happiness. Mm-hmm. We haven't taken the time to get clear. We've just adopted, as you said, the conditioning of the world around us to believe that, happiness will come when I. So for me, in the legal context, happiness will come when I make partner. Well, that's 10, 12 years down the road. Do I really want to wait for 10, 12 years to be happy? And so closing that authenticity gap is really about 2 things from my perspective. 1, beginning to believe that we can be happy right now, and defining the season that we're currently in and what the constraints in that season are and what we need in that season to be happy. And then 2, really owning that to the world, right? Mm-hmm. Being willing to say to people, this is what drives my happiness, and this is what I need right now in this season to be happy. And so this is what I'm going to go do. So that's the authenticity gap. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. The third gap, and then the reason I'm jumping ahead is because once people figure out what they want or need to be happy, often they jump right into getting it, right? Mm-hmm. And so the third gap is the physical energy gap. It's the idea that we aren't matching our capacity, so our time, our energy, our resources, to what matters to us. So we might say, being of service to people really matters to me, but I'm spending all of my time in a job that is not providing any service. Yeah. That is a physical energy mismatch, right? Or we might be in this world where we're saying yes to everything. And so we don't have time for the things that matter to us. So the problem that I see is that people go right from that desire that they've identified into action. And then what happens is, because they haven't taken the time to take a pit stop in their beliefs and feelings and their mindset, they go right back to old habits, to comfort zone. And so that's this middle gap. And I call that gap the emotional energy gap. But it's this idea that we have to do the work to recognize first the role that our nervous system plays in limiting our progress, and then on shifting our beliefs and feelings to support the future action that will allow us to do more of what matters and less of the rest. So learning how to say no, learning how to let go of guilt, learning how to recognize when our old nervous system pattern is just trying to keep us safe from change. And so that's the middle section, or the middle gap, that I think gets missed a lot, because we're a doing society. We want it, so we're going to go do it. And we get rewarded for that behavior in a lot of ways that don't ultimately result in happiness. But people tell us, oh yeah, that you're a go-getter. Oh yeah, your solutions are action oriented. That's awesome. But if you don't take the time to build that bridge with your mindset, you're just setting yourself up to be doing it again and again and again.
Becky, if I were to ask you, how do you define happiness? What would you tell me?
So I think I'm going to choose a different word. I believe that I'm here on the earth to have joy and to spread joy.
Okay.
And so for me, having joy starts with being equipped to feel all the feelings. So one thing I think gets lost with happiness and with joy is this idea that to be happy means I will only feel good things. That is not how it works, right? Life does not deliver us a smooth road all the time. Life is going to deliver us challenges, and it's about how we meet them and how we address them and how we cope with them and how we confront them. So the first part of that definition for me would be feeling all the feelings. The second part of that definition for me would be and this is very personal for me, it would be that when I'm working, it doesn't feel like work. That the work that I'm doing is a fit for who I am, so that when I am working, I am frankly just being myself, and I'm having fun. So that is a big part of happiness for me. And then the last thing I say sometimes that I measure success in smiles, and that's a little bit cliche, but what I mean is when I look back on the course of my day, if I have had mostly a smile on my face and the people around me have had mostly a smile on their face, then it's been a good day. Because we're all doing something or doing things that are putting a smile on our face. And so it's never 100% of the time, right? I mean, but if it's happened enough, then you feel it at the end of the day. You feel that that day has been more or less a smile, and that's a successful day to me.
So it's such a lovely, simple way of looking back at your day, really, when you do your reflection at the end of the day. Were there lots of smiles or not?
Right. And I think, look, I mean, it is simple, and I think that's part of why it gets lost, right? Because we want to measure it in something bigger or different. We want to measure it in something we can advertise to other people. You know, we want to measure it in the house we have, the car we drive, the money in our bank account, the purse we bought, the shoes we wear, whatever it is. But if those things don't make you smile, then they're just things.
Yes, exactly. I will refer to this formula of maximum happiness which you talk about, and there is, you already mentioned some of the elements there. One that I wanted your comment on really is this feeling or believing actually that you deserve to be happy, because I believe you know that there are some people who subconsciously maybe, or at a deeper level, they don't truly feel they deserve happiness. So what is your approach with that?
So to me, that is tied pretty deeply into a general feeling of not being good enough, right? And something that I've discovered over the course of my life, but really powerfully as I've begun to work with clients, is that truly 99%, maybe slightly more, maybe it's 99.5% of people are walking around the world believing in some way that they are not good enough. And we cannot all be right. Like we can't, so we must all be wrong, right?
Must delusion, yes.
So, I mean, truly, like once you start to recognize that if you can imagine a room full of the people you most respect and most admire, and then you can acknowledge that in that room, almost everybody feels not good enough, you start to question that myth, right? You start to say, wait a minute, this obviously is some disconnect. So that's the first thing. That's like the foundational thing. And then two really tactical things that I like to do with people who are feeling not good enough or maybe feeling in some way undeserving is, number one, I like to work with them to build their success stack. So we will sit down and make a list of all of the things that they have done well. Just make the menu so that you can look at it and say, oh yeah, you know what? Actually, even though I'm not super comfortable, maybe bragging about myself or sharing my success, it's there in black and white or on a colored piece of paper and a picture. I mean, everybody kind of likes to express it differently, but there is a picture here of the ways that I am valuable and successful. And then the other thing that I like to make people do, which some of them really don't enjoy, and it's an exercise that a coach actually gave to me, so I can't take credit for it, but it meaningfully shifted the way that I view myself, is, we hear a lot about having a daily gratitude practice. I'm a big fan of that, but I have a two-part practice. The first is I absolutely take the time to do daily gratitude. And now I also do a daily brag. What did I do well today? Because we are not good at that. We just aren't. And there's two pieces to that exercise. The first piece is naming the thing that you did well. And the second piece is really allowing yourself to feel the credit for that. Because it's one thing to name it, it's another thing to truly own it. And I mean, I'll be really honest, when I started doing that exercise daily, I fought it. And some days my daily brags were things like, I didn't yell at anyone today. But that is a brag, right? Like I was able to have a day that I controlled my emotions and I didn't get frustrated, even though it was a very frustrating day. So just talking about it more and getting in that habit really tends to shift people's self-perception. You have to give yourself, both from an emotional perspective, but also from a nervous system perspective, you have to give yourself those wins. You have to celebrate them. You have to acknowledge them. You have to feel them in order to shift away from that feeling of not deserving whatever it is, not being good enough, not deserving happiness.
Thank you. If I may add to that, because it's a wonderful method to lift yourself up and increase your self-esteem, really. What I have started doing fairly recently is this method of bragging, as you said it, or your wins, or what I'm proud of, but I do it in the mirror. So I speak to myself and say, Aggie, I'm proud of you for this. And it gives you so much of it's hard to describe it. The emotional shifts that you get while you're doing that are incredible.
I love that. And actually, thank you for saying that, because there is something powerful about speaking to ourselves out loud. Truly. Yeah. I think people often fail to appreciate the inner monologue that we have. But when we force ourselves to externalize that inner monologue, that can lead to huge shifts. Because the things that you say to yourself inside, once you force your mouth to say them, you're one of two things happens. Either it just further sinks in because they're good things, or you realize, wow, I would never say that to somebody. Why am I saying it to myself? Yes. But until you externalize it that way, that shift can be difficult to make. So thank you. That's a great one. And I use a lot of self-talk techniques myself and with my clients on a variety of things, but I hadn't thought to apply it to this technique, but I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, I just recently started implementing it, and because clearing or expressing or verbalizing, I will say, your internal dialogue out loud, even journaling, writing this down, it's very useful and cathartic. But when you actually speak it, it takes a whole lot different level of it. Fantastic. Becky, I wanted to also ask about saying no. It is something that you talk about quite a lot, about actually whether you say no enough. So do you want to explain this topic to me?
Sure. So, I mean, it's tied, as I'm sure you can already hear, right? It's tied directly to that formula for maximum happiness, right? I think our typical approach is we recognize that to be happy, we need to do more of what matters to us. But what we then do is we just do more, right? So I don't have it yet. I have this baseline, my life's full. I know I need more of whatever to be happy. So I'm just going to add and add and add until I'm to the point of overwhelm and burnout. And so to me, and frankly, in some ways, the most critical part of that formula is the doing less of the rest part. Being able to cut out the noise, which is hard. There's a lot of reasons why our society doesn't want us to say no, right? Or why we're told that we shouldn't. I mean, I can think back to growing up, right? I mean, you don't say no to your parents. And you don't say, and a lot of people grow up with a message of when someone needs help, if you can help, you should. And so you don't say no to that without ever really stopping to think, is this the right time to say yes for me? And so beginning to recognize that every time you're saying yes to something that isn't on that list of things that really is critical to your happiness, you are effectively saying no to a piece of happiness. Which, I mean, it's sort of basic, but yet we forget it a lot. We forget that we only have 24 hours in a day and we only have a certain amount of money currently in our bank account. And so we can't say yes to everything that comes along. And so we do have to get and develop a filter. And so that is something that I spend a lot of time with clients, is sort of developing their no filter, helping them figure out how they're going to decide what to say no to. Because it's not a formula that I can give, here's the formula and now everyone can go apply it, right? You've got to figure out, based on what your priorities are, what is critical to your happiness, what needs to get the no. And sometimes there are things you can't say no to that aren't critical to your happiness. So you need to also acknowledge that, right? And the example I use in my book, and it's a US example, but if you get called for jury duty, probably not critical to your happiness to show up and serve on a jury, right? But maybe not being, having a bench warrant out for your arrest might be critical to your happiness. And so there are certain obligations as sort of like a member of a community or a society that we can't say no to. But short of that, we really need to begin to take more control of saying no. And we throw out lots of reasons why I can't say no. Someone will judge me. I can't say no. I'll feel guilty. I can't say no. I have to. I can't say no because I have the resources. I should help. You can say no. It's hard sometimes. It will feel strange for your nervous system if you haven't been doing it. But it's really important, I think, to develop a checklist that sort of can help you evaluate decisions. Is this the right decision right now? And how do you figure that out for yourself?
You reminded me now of, there is that old story from ancient Greece where someone asked Socrates how he can go to the top of Olympus. So, and that was a metaphor, of course, for his life or his goals. And Socrates pointed out at the mountain. He said, "Do you see that?" He said, "Yes." So make sure that every step that you take points towards that direction. I think when we are about to take decisions of what to do in our day-to-day activities, we have to look at whether this that we're asked to do, does it serve us? Does it take us towards where our destination, or is really going to take us the other way?
I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah. And That's a perfect analogy, because it is about keeping your eye on the direction you want to head and moving whenever possible in that direction. And there are a lot of things that try to pull us off of that path, not maliciously, right? But I mean, we are trained to avoid discomfort, and keeping your eye on the top of Mount Olympus and ignoring the noise is uncomfortable. And people they confuse discomfort with wrongness.
Yes.
Uncomfortable is exactly how growth happens. Uncomfortable is exactly how progress happens. Uncomfortable doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. And that's a big deal for saying no, because often that is the threshold at which people stop the inquiry. Well, it feels uncomfortable to say no, so I'm going to do the comfortable thing and say yes. Okay. Then you're going to be right where you are at the bottom of Mount Olympus for much longer. That's your choice, right? But recognizing that shift has to happen, where you're willing to take on some of that discomfort, where you're willing to deal with the difficult feelings, right? I mean, I talked about, to me, happiness is being able to feel all the feelings. That's part of it, right? Being able to say, why do I feel guilty? Well, what is it that my guilt is really based on? Is it truly based on that I am letting somebody down in a way that is inconsistent with my values? Or is it based on a story of guilt? And if it's based on a story of guilt, it's time for me to let that go. I don't need to carry that guilt story anymore. My facts are my facts. And the fact is, I want to go to the top of Mount Olympus. And in order to do that, I need to say no to this thing. Cool. No more guilt.
So in terms of technique, so would you ask your clients to make a list of their tasks or their activities, so to pick out which they can say no to, or is it only about people asking you things?
So, I mean, one tool that I use in my life and that my clients use is a tool that I call, so this is after we've done the work to really define what it is that matters to your happiness. So you have a clear map of what your Mount Olympus is and what it's going to take to get you there. And so I use a technique that I call Subtract Sunday. And the reason it's called Subtract Sunday is because I do it on Sundays as I look at the week ahead. So I will look at my calendar, I will look at my task list, I will look at whatever's on my plate, and I literally will identify the things that are on that list or on my plate or on my calendar that don't support my top priorities. And guess what I will do to them? I will subtract them.
Yes.
And I do it sort of ruthlessly. Now, sometimes you don't have to subtract as much because you have more capacity. There's more space in your schedule. But then the next piece of the Subtract Sunday that's important is when I subtract those things, I'm very thoughtful about how I fill the new space I've created. So if I've freed up 2 hours on a Friday afternoon because I took off a meeting that just doesn't actually make sense to have now, doesn't support my current priorities, do I fill that with other noise, or do I fill that with something that then fuels my direction? And I want to add a thought, which is sometimes I fill it with rest. And that fuels my direction. So we've got to get over this idea that productivity is king and that downtime is unproductive, right? Like resting is doing something. And if you need to build that time for self-care, and I say rest, but it could be, exercise, it could be a wellness appointment. There's lots of things it could be, but self-care can be something that feeds that trip up Mount Olympus, because you need to have the stamina to get there. So that's it's a simple thing, but it's not something we do very often. I know a lot of people who spend, maybe Sunday or Monday morning planning their week, but they're just putting puzzle pieces into a container. They're not actually evaluating, are these the right puzzle pieces that I should be focused on this week? And it's empowering when you can look at your time and say, that is not a priority to me, and I can subtract it without even thinking twice.
That creates such an abundance of spare time that you wouldn't have otherwise, because our time gets filled up with everything, the noise, the distractions, and it's easy to get habitual into doing them day in, day out and never pay attention to them, whereas we could, as you say, just subtract them or delegate them if it is something that someone else can do for us and it doesn't serve our own
100%. I mean, I guess I probably really wasn't clear about that, but subtract doesn't mean throw away. Subtract could be delegate. Subtract could be postpone. Subtract could be, I don't know what else, but you know what I mean? It absolutely can still get done. It's just a matter of, I'll give you an example. I have a client who, for whom networking is a part of his job, but it got to the point where he was filling every available space with a coffee or a lunch or a breakfast or a Zoom call or a this, and feeling like he had no time to think, no time to reflect, no time to think about. I mean, so this is somebody who is a C-suite person who needs that strategic mind space and wasn't getting it because he was filling it all with networking. And so we really had to sit down and say, okay, yeah, networking is on your road, but how much and what's the payoff? And if you're having, 10, 15 of these conversations a week, what are you getting from that? And is it really feeding your process or your progress? And what are you missing out on as a result of using your time that way? And so that enabled him to sort of say, okay, yeah, you're right. 3 days a week, I will do something networking, and that's going to be sufficient. And what it also forced him to do was prioritize which of those meetings would be the most useful or fruitful for him, as opposed to just letting that calendar get filled up.
Yeah. It reminds me of a process that I call it not to-do list. That's how I've learned it from my own mentors. Yeah. But it's very similar in principle to take out the things that you don't want in your life, you don't need in your life anymore. They're just accumulated over time and they just slow you down, really.
Yes. Yeah, and I use that technique. The not to do list is in my toolbox too, and I tend to use that as we're sort of at the outset. Whereas Subtract Sunday, I guess it is a not to do list. It's the same idea, right? But Subtract Sunday is more of like a weekly maintenance tool for me, right?
It's a great tool. It's a great tool, Becky. I love the idea. I'm going to give it a try in a few days when it's Sunday.
So when it's Sunday. and look, I mean, and let's be real. You could do it daily, truly. You could look, if you're a person who doesn't plan on Sundays and you've blocked out time every morning to plan your day, you can use this same tool, right? It's just about being really not just, hey, how am I fitting this all, but is this what I need to fit? Right? Have I really stopped to think about, and I'll use my priorities on a very micro level. Like, okay, so if right now I'm in a business building season, and so my priority is really investing and pouring into my coaching business, let's look at today and let's look at what the short-term priority is. And then what 3 things do I need to do today that will be supportive of that priority? And I'm going to schedule those first. I'm going to make sure those happen before anything else. So there's lots of ways to do that, but I do think it is about bringing a level of thoughtfulness to the what that we haven't brought before.
It's fantastic. Thank you. Becky, I would like to ask you also a few quick fire questions to start wrapping things up. So the first one I always ask is, what does personal development mean to you?
So personal development to me means being willing always to consider how you can do it better. Recognizing that we will never have it all figured out, and we can always learn something that will make our lives measurably better, measurably happier.
Yeah, that's so true. And let's say you could go back in time and meet the 18-year-old Becky. What's the one advice that you would give her?
Well, I don't know that the 18-year-old Becky would have listened to this, but the advice that I would give her is to actually spend time in meaningful conversation with herself to figure out what it is that is important to her, instead of relying on everyone outside, everyone externally, to tell her what she should do.
It's a great belief to have, and I understand what you're telling me, that an 18-year-old would probably find it hard to accept this belief. I believe it 100%.
Yeah.
But
I mean, and I guess the other thing I would add, if I were to say that to her, is also recognize that you will need to have this conversation with yourself on a continuous basis, because it's going to change. And allow the time and space to recognize those shifts and those changes, right? Yeah. You will someday graduate from college and have a job, and then you will someday have a husband, and then you will someday have children, and then someday those children will grow up, and there will be other shifts, some P.S. when you're 45, there'll be a pandemic, but, be prepared to notice that those shifts have happened, and then to take the time to reevaluate, given that shift, given the constraints of that shift, what is it that is meaningful? What is it that matters to you? And how do you architect a life around that?
Mm-hmm. If you could wave a magic wand and change something in the world as it is today, what would you change? I mean, can I wave a magic wand and wish for more wishes? No, honestly, I think it would be, I'm torn between two choices. I think that it would be that we could normalize feelings. I think that would go a long way. I think if we could get to a place where we could recognize that we have them, that it's okay to have them, that it's okay to talk about them, that it's okay for them to change, and that the way that we work through them is to listen to them and each other, I think that would be huge. 100% agree with you. Absolutely, yes. Makes me think, I think the most critical element of self-mastery really is being able to master your emotional state. If you manage to do that, then everything else is easy.
I think that's right. And I think people mistake mastery, though, for control, and that's not what it means, right? It's being able to move through your emotional states with skills and tools and support.
That's fantastic. I'm writing this down because it was so good. Becky, if you were to, emerging from this conversation we had, if you were to give the listener one actionable piece, one actionable item, which one would you give?
I think we've talked about a handful. But I want to add one that I haven't talked about in it. Well, I guess I talked about it in the context of my own life, but I would encourage people to really sit down and not just spend the time in thought, but make concrete, and as you said, like verbalize and articulate what it is that really matters to their happiness, and write it down. And then when they write it down, ask themselves even more questions about it to dig deeper. If you write down, well, and I say this with no judgment, you write down, well, having abundant financial wealth matters to my happiness. Why? What is it about that that's meaningful to you? What is it about that car, that house, that money, the job? Why does that make you happy? And really dig as deep as you can down to the fundamentals of what drives your happiness, so that you can begin to think about how to call more of the things that meet that list, that deep down list, into your life. So that would be the actionable thing, which is sort of a big ask, but it's to dream without limits and to be really honest about what matters to you.
Thank you for that. And it is, I agree, it's a tremendously valuable exercise for anyone to do. How can people connect with you and find out more of what you do?
So I would say the best way for people to do that would be to head over to my website, which is www.grantleycoaching.com/podcasts. And on that page, you can find out about my book. You can find out about my coaching work. You can find my Instagram account, my LinkedIn account. Sort of everything is there for you to be able to find me, as well as free access to a mini course that I have that's sort of a preview of the content in my book. So again, that's www.grantley, GRANTLEY, coaching, all one word, .com/podcasts.
That's brilliant. I'll put it in the show notes as well. Becky, is there anything that you were really hoping I would ask you today and I completely missed it?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered the ground that made sense to cover, and I've really appreciated our conversation.
So have I. I want to thank you very much for your time, for being here and sharing your wisdom with us. I want to wish you all the very best in your business and in your life. Any last parting words?
I don't have anything. I would just say, like, let's just get out there and try and be happy, because that's why we're here.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and rate Personal Development Mastery on Apple Podcasts, and also share this episode with someone who you think will benefit from it. If you want to become part of an exclusive community, gain access to unique content, and at the same time support this podcast, then become my patron. The link is in the show notes, or you can type bit.ly/pdmpat. If you want to know more about what I do and how I can help you, join my Facebook group Personal Development Mastery. Again, the link is in the show notes, or you can simply type bit.ly/pdmgroup. And until next time, stand out, don't fit in,